All right, so today we're going to start with serratus anterior. And the serratus is like the word saw. And the reason it's named that is because, if you look at the kind of the borders of this muscle, it looks like a serrated knife, right? Like a steak knife, yeah, or a saw. And so, we've got some good, welcome. We've got some good pictures throughout the module that, obviously a lot of our clients are not this ripped, but it is nice to look at ripped pictures to get a visual on where this muscle is for our more typical clients. And so here it's this bulge on the side that I just kind of outlined in orange, but what I'd like to sort of compare it to here is, this line of the lats, right? So the serratus will go deep to the lats, attaching all the way to the anterior border of the scapula. Of course, it's too deep there. And I'm just pointing out this here because this is where you usually can feel it the most. And you can feel it on yourself right now. If you lift up your arm, you've got the big bulk of the lats and you want to come anterior to your lats. And then if you palpate up and down, you can feel some sort of thin feeling, thin-ish, tender, sometimes ropey feeling muscles anterior to your lats. And the biggest thing to distinguish them from is the ribs. The ribs are going to feel smooth, and they're deep to serratus. So it's not the really smooth bumps; it's the muscle tissue superficial to them. Questions so far? Oh, thank you. I thought there was one. No.
What? Huh?
Yeah, so I can make you one for later.
Oh,
The packet's in the back.
No.
I understand. I will get you one later when we take time to. You just wrote it down. I can get you one when we take time to sculpt the muscles. But anybody who does want to follow along, the packets are in the back if you want them now instead of later. Thanks for letting me know. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's move on. Oh, and of course, and we'll see some pictures later. Obviously, part of this is also covered by breast tissue, right? And it depends how large the breast tissue is. We never touch the nipples, so even in men, we're not going to go any further than this. But this is the main part that we end up working serratus anterior down here. And serratus anterior is tight on a lot of our clients, right? Because it does the protraction of the scapula. And so when we have that rounded shoulder pattern, which is so common, that is serratus, pulling them forward. Also gravity, right? People are just resting forward in gravity. Sometimes they're just tender and thin, but it's just like a little bit of a raisedness on your ribs. And when we come around for some palpation later, I can help you if you can't feel it on yourself. Weakness?
For massage, if the serratus anterior is damaged, would that cause breathing problems? And if a patient has breathing problems,
Yep.
would we perform massage only if that's is that something only the doctor recommends, or would you do?
Yeah, great question. So, basically, if there's a breathing problem, can serratus be involved, and do we work with that, or only if a doctor says so? Yeah, I mean, any of the muscles that attach to the ribs can definitely be part of breathing problems, even if they're just aggravated by it. And so we can work on them in those cases. For example, even if somebody has like asthma with wheezing and or somebody's getting over a cough when they've been coughing a lot of times any of the muscles that attach to the ribs will be sore and aggravated from that, and it can be helpful to massage them. Yeah. Sometimes, and we'll learn this much later, sometimes if somebody's been coughing a lot or for other reasons too, can actually get a rib kind of out of place. So if they have a real difficulty taking in a deep breath and they have a lot of soreness in specific spots around their ribs, sometimes that can be a rib out of place. And we never do chiropractic adjustments, but we can often put ribs in with a gentle technique called positional release. So I'll teach you that later. But then you still want to work with the muscles and the fascia in the area. Yeah, does that answer your question? And are there follow-up questions?
Yeah, no, no.
You bet. All right, cool. So let's start to look at the details. And as you know, I like to look at the origin and then the insertion and then the actions. So the origin, the O, of course, the external surfaces of the upper 8 or 9 ribs. And so again, on this diagram on the left, it's where these little gray lines are, or these gray slits or slips. So it's sort of the end of where the muscle is on these ribs is where it originates. And the parts of it that you can palpate, you can see that that can get pretty tender. And sometimes some of them are more palpable than others. The insertion, typically drawn in blue, anterior surface of the medial border of the scapula. So this is one of those that when the scapula is in place and you're looking at a two-dimensional drawing, it can be a little confusing, sort of like subscapularis. But if we were to look at a scapula model, it would be this anterior surface of the medial border. And so that, of course, would go on top of the ribs. And so like on this model, I still have subscapularis in purple. And then the serratus would attach even more medial than that. And then it would come closer to the ribs. So it would be deeper than this subscapularis, right? Deeper. Yeah. And then it would attach to the ribs like so. Does that make sense? Does that bring up questions?
So this on the ribs and it's attached on the other side?
Yep, exactly. And then the reason it's deeper than the subscapularis, right, is because the subscapularis ends up attaching to the arm or the humerus, right? So it kind of comes in front, whereas serratus is going to be like deeper to that to attach to these ribs. Now, where we palpate it the most is, showing in this diagram right here. But as the palpation video in the module shows, right, you can also lift up, like we do with our scapula mobilization, you can lift up this scapula, and to some degree, you can get up under this medial border. Hi, welcome. Hold on one second, just because we're recording. Yeah. Now that we know the origin and insertion, I'd like to take a look at the directions of the fibers. And this is nice to look at your models, your skeleton models, as well as to feel your own ribs, or with permission, ribs of the person next to you. And, you can see that the ribs really angle quite a lot, right? They don't go straight across. So kind of follow like how each of the ribs is kind of like arched, sort of like a rainbow. And right now I'm just drawing the fiber directions with these serrati muscles. And you can, basically see that we have a lot of different angles, right, going on here. The parts near the top are kind of coming more straight across. and then the parts near the bottom are coming more downward. And this is helpful to understand when, you know, we're kind of pulling on this angle down here. And we're angling down. That's what's going to make it so that this actually spins up, because that's one of its motions, is upward rotation. So let's take a look at all of the actions. So it says with the origin fixed. So what that means, right, is if the scapula is not moving, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. When the rib side is more stable, right, and we're ending up moving the scapula more, we can abduct the scapula coming forward. So abduct is the same as protract, and that's considered its primary or main motion, right? And that's why it's called the boxing muscle, because it, you know, really pulls the scapula forward. We tend to look at, and this is going to be a theme when looking at today's muscles, right? We tend to like isolate, right? Is this muscle at the scapula or is this muscle at the humerus? But in everyday real actions, we often combine those movements, right? So obviously, if you're throwing a punch, you're moving your glenohumeral joint as well. But usually our glenohumeral movements are accompanied with scapulothoracic movements. Does that make sense? Questions? Yeah, Erica?
So, just for study purposes. On the action where it jumps up and rotates, presses and holds.
Yeah.
You have to know all that, because like I know the study tool that I have, it just says protracts the scapula and rotates it upwards. Is that correct or is that incorrect? Like partially.
Yeah, it's a little hard to answer. I'll try to be as succinct as possible. Your licensing exam may ask you questions that include all of the movements, or it might have questions that really only talk about one or two primary movements. So sometimes you'll only need to know its primary movement, but sometimes it might come up its other movements as well. And it's sort of one of the sort of risks if you study with different study tools that are not your trail guide, is it might just be confusing to not say the exact same thing. But it's correct, it's just not all of its actions. And whenever actions are listed, they're usually listed from the most common, strongest movement to the least common movement. So those first movements are its biggest, strongest movements. That's your question? Excellent. Yeah, does that answer your question, Erica?
Yes, because when I was looking at one of my other assignments, Elizabeth was like, if you read it, because that's not what the trail guide says, and I was like, oh, okay, so am I totally wrong or just not enough?
Oh, yeah. So you're just not totally complete, but you're not totally wrong.
Okay.
Yep, it's partially right. Anna.
Is there, speaking of study tools, any others that you suggest that are outside of what we're already using?
Well, for this particular topic, if you want to have everything worded the same as Trail Guide does have an app that is not one of the cheaper apps, but it does go on sale. But it is okay and useful to study with the cheaper kinesiology apps, because even if the wording is not exactly the same, you're getting the same idea about what movements it does and its origin insertion. I don't want it to confuse you, but it might even help you more for the test to recognize different wording for basically the same thing. That might help some people and confuse others.
Is there one that tends to be more complete besides the trail guide? That can expose us to different wording, but it also seems to have a pretty full picture of description.
Yeah, I can look up the exact titles and send them to you. There's an anatomy app that I think is really good that I'm spacing the exact name right now.
Anatomy map is on.
It's called Anatomy app. Yeah.
Anatomy map.
Oh, anatomy map. I think there's one like vital anatomy or something. I'll look up the ones. Yeah,
I would like that.
sure. Yep, you bet. Oh, and some people really like too, like it depends how much, you like the detail of all the bony landmarks and stuff, but like there's some, like Netter is famous for really great anatomical drawings, and we've got a textbook there and we've got a flashcard there. It has features like you can kind of drop pins in things and practice labeling things and all that. So I mean, but that's an expensive one, and you can get other ones that do similar things a lot cheaper. Yep.
On the test, are we going to need to know a lot of the bony landmarks and things like that?
Yeah, so if you go to MBLEX, if you Google MBLEX, you can look at all of their study guide information, and we'll have a whole quarter studying just that. But like if you want to preview, I believe off the top of my head, it's the kinesiology, I think is something like 25 or 30% of the test is kinesiology. Look it up, don't quote me, but it's approximately that much. And there are some diagrams, but it's all multiple choice. Okay, so we're going to abduct or protract the scapula moving forward. Upwardly rotate the scapula. Again, I think a good reference point for that is, what is the arm doing? So that's upward rotation and that's downward rotation. So you want to look at the arm side, right? So if the arm side goes up, that's upward rotation. So it upwardly rotates the scapula. It can depress the scapula, right? Scapula down. And so that I think is useful, right? To look at these downward angled fibers, right? If we pull from here to here, that's going to pull us down. And then it can hold the medial border of the scapula against the rib cage because of this attachment here. And I think that one is important clinically because if you see a client whose medial border of the scapula just kind of sits up or pops up, that's called a winged scapula, winged like a bird. And that is indicative of a weak serratus anterior. Now, it just might be weak and underutilized, or there might be something else like nerve related going on, right? And we can't diagnose that, but sometimes it's just an inactive serratus anterior.
So from a massage perspective, you're not wanting to stretch that medial aspect more. Are you wanting to get into the serratus and the teres and all of that kind of stuff more?
Yeah, I mean, that's accurate. The first part of what you said, you're not going to want to stretch that border, right? But you're gonna want to activate serratus. So when they do protraction, you can have them fire that muscle against your resistance, right? So they're trying to push forward and resisting. Yep, just like that. Yeah. If the scapula is fixed, that means, right, if the scapula is held down and not moving, it may help with elevation and inhalation, right? So it can be helpful as one of the breathing muscles. And, we'll get to the breathing muscles a little later, but we're supposed to use our diaphragm a lot. So at the base of our ribs, I love that. Loud and proud questions. At the base of our ribs, there's this umbrella shaped muscle called the diaphragm. It's a very unusual muscle. It's like shaped like a jellyfish or an umbrella. And when we inhale, it contracts and goes down, and that increases the space in the ribs, which creates a vacuum or brings the air in, right? And so that's supposed to be the biggest mechanism for breathing. And then all these other muscles are supposed to be sort of like accessory, just help a little bit. But what happens is a lot of people don't use their diaphragm as much in their breathing, and they end up using all these little muscles, which really stresses them out. And so you'll see a lot of folks who kind of do upper chest stress breathing. having really jacked up scalenes and serratus anterior. And we can help by massaging those and helping them learn how to do deep diaphragm breathing. Yep.
Is that something you can massage? Is that-
Yeah, great question. Can we actually massage it? We can reach the parts of it that are right under the rib cage, but not the really deep parts. We can also, while massaging those parts, work with teaching the clients how to do deep breathing that engages that diaphragm. Yeah. Awesome questions. You guys are the best class. Yes.
Good, I'm doing more.
Awesome.
So when you're doing deep breathing, I like to do deep breathing.
Yep.
I understand that a long exhale is actually the really important part. People always think it's a super long inhale, but it's actually a really long exhale, but I forget why. Do you know the answer to that?
I don't. I know that there's a lot of different ways to kind of work with your breathing. And so I'm not necessarily going to even agree with the first part of your statement because there's a lot of different ways to work with your breath. But it's an interesting concept and I don't know.
Maybe we should talk about it on Friday.
Sure, we can talk about breathing more on Friday.
Box.
Yeah. Let's talk about different types of breathing.
Triangle breathing.
Nope.
Rectangle breathing.
All right, and then we don't need to worry so much about the nerves on this one. I'll try to call out the ones that you're most likely to get tested on. So let's just look at a couple other sort of pictures here. Here we got on the upper left, where we can palpate the serratus anterior. We're going to want to palpate that anterior to the lats. And what this picture is indicating, right, is that you're having the client do an active resisted movement. And that kind of thing is on your licensing exam. So active movement means you're having the client do the action themselves. And then resisted means, the therapist is resisting that movement. So that is one of the great ways to help strengthen a muscle, right? That's not firing. So it doesn't work in that scenario for the therapist just to pull the client's arm forward, right? That's a stretch. You need the client to do the action themselves. Active resistant, right? The active means the client is doing the movement, and the resistant means the therapist is resisting it. And like the little bit of these that the little bit of movement stuff we've done so far, you don't need the client doing a lot of strength. This is not like a, drop sets at the gym kind of thing, which are on my mind
You
because
love drop sets.
I just messed them up last week. So I'm just laughing at myself.
You love them.
I told my kid what I did with drop sets and they thought it was hilarious because I messed them up so bad. But just the client can use as little as like 10 to 25% of their strength. The important thing is that they're learning how to activate that muscle. So, and then on the bottom right here, this is indicative of the therapist reaching around to the medial border of the scapula. And we'll spend more time with this in the lab. That first day we introduced it, don't worry if you didn't really get it. It takes a while to learn this. But you can see in this bottom right drawing, the client, it can be helpful to have the client on the side. It's not necessary, but when a client is on their side, you can really move around their arm a lot and you can support their arm, and it's really easy to drop that scapula and get under it when they're on their side. Not the only position though, you can do this prone as well. And of course, if we're reaching around this medial border of the scapula, what muscles do we have to palpate through? Traps and rhomboids, beautiful, beautiful. But those are both easy muscles to work through. Pretty easy to do there. Yeah. And again, these fibers, they're going to be tender usually. these muscles that attach right to the ribs. So you don't be surprised if you find some tender spots. I got a really good tender spot right here. Not going to say anything about drop sets, Krish. I said my my limit of drop sets for the week. That's what I got to do in the gym today. That's why it's on my
And
mind.
then you lower the weight, and then you do it more, and then you lower the weight, and you do it again,
Instead of going up.
and then you just keep going until you stop.
What's it called when you do, you keep adding weight after you do the set?
Like pyramid set,
Oh,
PR.
building it. Yeah.
Thanks for that little break of workouts. All right. So here, you know, these slides are indicating some strategies for breast tissue. Probably the you know, kind of safest strategy is to have the client side lying. In the side lying position, a lot of the breast tissue with gravity will just fall forward. And so that makes a bigger area here where the client's hand is without breast tissue. When they're on their back, posterior, right, a lot of it is going to fall out to the sides, right? And so the safest position is let gravity get the breast tissue out of the way. Another possibility is to use the back of the therapist's hand to kind of isolate the muscle, but you're going to want to be very clearly on muscle and not breast tissue when you do that. I personally do not do that. I take a more conservative approach. If there's smaller breast tissue, though, you can, you know, work more in a prone position. And obviously, you know, if the part of the serratus that is really deep to the breast, I mean, we just don't massage that part. Questions? I'm gonna pause this for a second. Any luck?
No, I'm working with our infrastructure services team.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, whatever it was not just me. I don't think it paused because it's not telling me that. So I thought I was paused. I was not. Okay. So I think it's really helpful to use that, look at these synergist slides. And now that today we're going to finish all the shoulder muscles, and it's going to make even more sense, right? Now that you're going to know all of them, to really start grouping them together. And part of the reason you're going to want to group them together is to start being able to do some clinical problem solving. So for example, if you have an issue that is related to, you know, too much shoulder elevation, and you can see that in a client's posture, either they're stuck in that posture or that was a movement that aggravated a problem, you're going to want to look at all of the elevators. And you're going to also want to look at the antagonists. So you're going to want to look at all the elevators and all of the depressors, right? So that's why we want to start looking at these groups. I think it's really helpful when you look at these synergist pages that you can see all of the pictures of the fibers together. And you can usually kind of see and imagine, right, like how the fibers that are like facing in the same direction or going on the same angle all share that job. So we're starting off here on the top right with depression. So serratus is working with the lower fibers of trapezius and pec minor to depress the scapula, right? And a lot more people have too much elevation. So then what tends to happen is these elevators are short and tight. So those are the ones that we really want to lengthen. Whereas these depressors tend to not be activated enough. So those are the ones where we want to use active client movements or active resisted client movements and help the client learn how to use the muscles that are sleepy, right? And usually a good order is to do the lengthening first. So lengthen the short, tight ones before activating the weak ones. Yep.
So the other day, Lucy had to help me out because I was having some muscle issues.
Hi.
me, I had a question about your lighting in there.
Oh,
Stretching on. Super powerful.
uh-huh.
Can you believe it was amazing? And one thing that she did was the most painful thing that's ever happened to my neck beyond like a car accident, but the most effective thing. And I feel like she grabbed me like by the scruff of
Uh-huh.
my neck
Uh-huh.
and pulled it in the most gnarly way. But I think she was loosening all of that. Elevators.
Uh-huh.
I think that's what she was doing. It was insane.
Uh-huh.
It really hurt, and she's like, breathe, breathe. She kept trying to get me to focus on the breath, but oh, man, how did you feel after? I feel like a different person after she worked on me.
And your back was good. Right?
It was
Your
my hips were insane, and I couldn't believe the stuff she did. And she included, I'm just adding this in, but she included some Thai massage stretches and stuff. I am definitely going to learn Thai massage.
That's powerful, powerful
Oh my
stuff.
goodness.
Yeah.
So that's what she was doing, right? She was just loosening all that elevator stuff, and she was like pulling my neck muscles and skin off my body.
I mean, I didn't see what she was doing, but from what you're describing, those were definitely involved. And then there's other neck muscles we haven't studied yet that are in that neighborhood as well.
Yeah.
So sounds awesome. Oh yeah, Lucy will take you apart and put you back together.
I know.
Don't let her size fool you. She is way deeper than she's probably deeper than me and Elizabeth combined.
What?
It doesn't look like it when she does the demos,
Yeah,
but she was killing me in the best way.
killing me softly.
Yes. She was soft, it was gnarly.
Lauren Hill version, of course.
Yeah, Lauren.
I'm just singing it in my head now. All right, back to lecture. One time. All right, so where are we? Adductors and adduction, retraction, abduction, protraction. So, right, our serratus can pull the scapula forward, you know, so in this, looks like a bench press, you know, we want to push, if we want to activate serratus, we want to push those scapula forward too, you know, not just the arms. And its friend in that is pec minor, which we're going to study today. It is a little but very, very strong muscle. And then, of course, those are the protractors. They get work. They're activated a lot because so many of us have a slump forward posture. And so it's important that these muscles that are behind that do the opposite action, they get too weak and lazy and not activated. And so we really want to activate the traps and the rhomboids. And so here's a great activity for bringing those scapula back. You know, you want to bring the scapula back to the spine with an active movement, right? Active or active resisted. The client has to do the movement to activate those. Questions, comments, interpretive dances?
When you say activate, it makes it seem like they are not already active when they might be in hyperactive.
Well, I was talking about ones that are probably underactive, right? So if we're constantly protracting our scapula, then our retractors are tending to be underactive. So we, you know, people might also say we want to fire them, we want to contract them, we want to activate them. We want them to shorten and to do their job. Yeah.
Act.
Yeah. A lot of massage therapists, you know, kind of focus more on the short and tight muscles and fascia, and that's effective to an extent. But whenever there's a pattern of one movement being too active, then its opposite is being underactive. So it's helpful to make sure you activate the underactive as well. Our upward and downward rotation, we were looking at upward rotation with serratus, and its friend in that is the traps. And for the downward we've got a whole bunch we got the rhomboids, levator, and pec minor. All right, let's move on. Okay, so pec major is the big superficial muscle on the chest. We've already started stretching that, right, with the pin and stretch, you know, the snow angels or the one side at a time. The pec major is the superficial muscle in the chest, and it has a super big origin and can be described as having like a fan-like shape from that origin. You know, so we're coming all the way from up here on the clavicle, all the way across on the sternum, and all the way up from down in the breast tissue. Let's take a look at the details of the origin, insertion, and action. And as we do that, keep in mind that pec minor is going to be a deep to this as we're looking at pec major. That's where we're going next. And in the trail guide on the right of page 89, it's got a good, you know, grayed out version on the clavicle and sternum. You can see where it attaches or originates. All right, so I'm going to draw that on the bottom right where it's gray. The origin is the medial half of the clavicle. So medial, the side closer to the center. That's this part. And that's your collarbone, right? So this part of your collarbone that's near your center. And if you do some arm movements, you can feel how your pec attaches all the way there. The sternum and the cartilage of the first through the 6 ribs. So the sternum is your breastbone, so this whole breastbone, and it's on the more lateral aspect of it. Each of these parts of the sternum have different names, and so you might sometimes see it called out as which part of the sternum. And then you can see over here a little bit onto the ribs as well. And so again, if you take a moment to start feeling your own pec major, and if you feel up and down, so you're going against the ribs and the fiber direction, you can feel when you make movements across your chest and forward, you can feel how those fibers go all the way to your sternum. And then our insertion is the crest of the greater tubercle of the humerus. So that greater tubercle again is the bigger bump on the humerus, and it's sort of the crest is sort of the roughened edge below it. So if you're looking at a bigger model, you know, again, you can see this bigger bump. There's a roughened area below it. Now you can feel your way out on your pecs if you engage them, and we'll notice that this is deep to the deltoid. This is a muscle like the deltoid where it's better to work the origin than the insertion. But if you do engage your pecs and you follow those bellies out, you can feel how they go across into your painful, and that's going to go under your deltoid. But we're going to do a lot more with the origin and the insertion. Questions, comments?
How did you do with the use and the breast on hip?
Yeah. Yeah, they call that part a free border. So the edge, if there's a muscle where you can grab the edge of it, that's called the free border of the muscle. And the pecs is easy to grab there, like the lats is easy to grab there, right? And they both frame your axilla. Thank you for bringing that up. Good point. Anna? Asking a question.
I'm asking a question. Just in your experience, when people are tearing that muscle, is it usually at the insertion point? of this muscle? Is that usually where they're finding injury?
If it's an actual tear, that does tend to head up more towards the insertion, but people can have definitely like strains in other parts of it as well.
Okay.
Yep,
I remember.
yep.
So it seems like it's where is generally, like when it's better to massage the origin versus the insertion, or is it just like a really individual kind of thing?
Uh-huh.
Some that are tender, like we talked about, is it the deltoid one that is tender?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. I would need to think about a lot of muscles to see if I can come up with a pattern.
Okay, there's not a.
Because some of them do work really well around the insertion, like the on the insertion.
My
For
brain's trying to find a way to like have a general pattern or.
I mean, I don't know if we can categorize all of them at once, but like these ones up here in the arm that tend to be better origin than insertion, we've got really nervy areas in that insertion and also deep to the deltoid on this. And I don't find that super productive. Also, it tends to be a really like a kind of a thicker sort of tendon and feeling at that point. I find that hard to engage with and release in this particular area.
Like, why is the deltoid one tender? Why is that insertion tender?
I don't know how to answer that.
Okay.
I mean, it's pulling on the bone, but so are a lot of them. So I'm not sure why. I mean, mine, I had a shot there and it's going to be raised the rest of my life. It's really messed up.
Got shot.
No, I got a vaccinator. Thanks for giving me some street cred. Yeah, the shrapnel there.
All right.
But everybody's is tender there. Yeah, whether you've been shot or not. All right, so actions. The pec, of course, is a very strong muscle. All the fibers, here again, we're talking a very big muscle that kind of fans out. So whenever a muscle is fanning out on different angles, it helps us be strong in different movements. So in the case of like the deltoid, we can pull forward, back, side, rotate, all of that. With the pecs, we can think about how when we move our arm, up and out in big, strong movements, we can pull the arm from all these different directions and still have a pec angle that can, work on that. You can do different sports or, different movements like that. So first, again, because we have these big angles, we can kind of look at this as having different parts to it. So we can look at the upper fibers are the parts that attach here at the clavicle. If we want to separate this muscle, it's harder to draw on this than it looks. And our lower fibers, that was in red. And our lower fibers I'm going to do here in orange-ish are all of these ones that attach right on the sternum. If we're going to start on lower, they, kind of, if the arm is up at an angle, it's really activating a different part of it, which is important if you tell your client to stretch their pecs or to work out the pecs. Like if we're going to do like against a human or a door jamb or a wall kind of stretch, we want to make sure that we're sometimes up high and we're sometimes out to the side and we're sometimes down low. And if you were to use like rope training or something too, right, you'd want to get those different angles. What I'll do is they can all adduct the shoulder or the glenohumeral joint. So, they all cross from here to here. So when you shorten, they can all pull the shoulder in, adduction. They also can all medially rotate. Beautiful, great to see you acting it out. And they can all, to some extent, help with the inhalation. The upper fibers can also flex the shoulder. So shoulder forward, glenohumeral joint forward. Great to see you out. So flexing the shoulder and horizontally adducting the shoulder. So arm across. And then the lower fibers can extend the shoulder. And that one might seem most confusing, but think about it in terms of if your arm is already flexed, they're on an angle to be able to pull them back down. Questions on what the pec can do? Pec major? Yes. Yeah, an important muscle. All right, let's be sure. So this one on the top left is kind of what Zoya was talking about, that the palpation video showed that you can get this, the side of the pec, right? And I mean, you can do that on yourself right now. That's a great place to access the pec. You know, it's a big, strong muscle. And then it's the same thing here on this bottom left drawing is showing that with the client's sideline. Again, it has more breast tissue. And that could be true with larger breasts. It can also be true when there's more adipose tissue, because adipose tissue or fat kind of adds to the breast tissue. But in either or both cases, a sideline position will help shift that out of the way. And we can also palpate pec major, like in this right diagram on the right. We can very much work it out at the sternum and at the clavicle, within, of course, whatever limits of not getting to into the tissue. You can feel that on yourself. And because the fibers come across here, it works well to palpate up and down across the fibers. And of course, you want to distinguish between the ribs and the muscle. And you can activate that muscle and you can feel those muscles pushing against your fingers to make them different than the ribs below them. And also, if you move up and down, the ribs are really smooth and slippery, whereas the muscles are more bumpy. And these also may be tender. Interesting, will get you thinking ahead a little bit, is that while we look at these very specific muscle attachments, what happens in reality is that there's this fascia or connective tissue that ends up weaving and connecting different muscles. So in this case, if I'm looking at a right pec, we're going to have a connective pattern, tissue pattern going directly over to the left. And so, we're going to address that whole thing. And it'll literally supports whatever movements are most common. So you'll see and feel a difference in somebody who's right-handed, let's say serving a lot, some kind of serving sport, volleyball, tennis, something, or throwing, football, whatever, versus somebody who's left-handed doing that. But in either case, you're going to have a pattern of the tissue crossing over. Hello, welcome. How are you doing, Kevin?
Well, how are you?
Good.
Good.
You got?
Can I introduce you?
Yes.
Am I interrupting? Should I stop?
Pec Major. Do you guys have any questions about that? Yep, we can.
So for on women, you're gonna just want to stay on the upper part that they use that, right?
Yes.
To the side if possible.
Yeah, so of course it depends on how much breast tissue there is, but the best strategy is the sideline position, and that'll move the breast tissue out of the way, and then you can get to more of the side here. Or some there back, you can sometimes get up into there. Yeah.
I think we were starting to address the fascia.
Oh yeah, the fascia. Did you have a question about the fascia connection?
You were finished, that you talking about it coming in this direction.
Yeah, so you know, even if we're looking at just one side of Pec Major at a time, like let's say the right side, and you can go ahead and feel yours while you fire your pec in motion, and you can feel how it gets harder. If you trace that to the origin on the sternum, then across there's a connective tissue that's kind of springy, and where this Pec Major on the right ends, it weaves right into the fascia that connects to the other one. So you know, we'll learn myofascial release as a whole technique, but we want to work with that connection. So even if we're focusing on this one, we want to cross over to what gets tight here on the sternum. Yeah. Is that any follow-up on that questions? You bet. Thanks for coming to that. Nice to meet you. Thanks for stopping by. All right, so let's look at the synergist in our flexion of the glenohumeral joint. We've got the anterior deltoid and this upper fibers of pec. And again, you can see how these fibers are in a very, very similar direction and angle, right? So, and you can feel that on yourself right now as you do the movement. You can activate both of those, right? You can feel your deltoid and your Pec Major upper fibers, so the part that goes on your clavicle, both hard. And so this is a great example, right? If you're working that out, you don't want to treat it like just one or the other, right? They're very much connected, and they're very much both going to be engaged. And so like if you were doing techniques like on the top of the deltoid, right, you'd want to like take that all the way to the pecs. And sometimes you can do that by just like engaging that arm and really moving the arm around to get that fascia and the muscle tissue better. Oh, and we're going to have biceps brachii and coracobrachialis. So we're going to address those all together. One thing that happens, again, we start to talk about fascia. We'll have a wonderful long time with myofascial release. It's one of my favorite techniques. But sometimes what happens is these muscles that are in close proximity, whether next to each other or superficial and deep to each other, doing the same action, sometimes they'll literally get stuck together with connective tissue. It can act like scar tissue, or if you picture like sticky spiders, and those two is to kind of help separate or differentiate those. So you should have like a little border or separation between your deltoid and your pecs, but sometimes they'll just be like right stuck together. And then what happens is they end up not being able to do separate jobs, right? They're just always working together.
Kind of like where those super buff, like bodybuilders.
Yeah, you know, sometimes, you know, folks who are bodybuilders or otherwise work out a lot, sometimes they're doing enough stretching that their muscles are actually flexible and work well independently and are very healthy and isolated. And other times they're kind of doing that sort of at the expense of flexibility and all that. So it kind of varies. Yeah, how much mobility they have. Extension, we mostly, you can see on the right, we're mostly talking about muscles attaching from the back. And so this lower fibers of the Pec Major is really only extension from a raised position. So that's the only time your lower pec is really at the right angle, and you can, you know, start in this position and then bring your arm down and feel how your lower pecs get hard when you do that. Yeah. And of course, that's a great, I like that move. That's a good one. In my only personal experience. Why, what?
If you go Why did they indicate this in different color?
This right here.
Yeah.
Great question. So this is the triceps, and triceps are interesting. They have this huge tendinous part. And I find it very interesting. You know, we've got these fibers coming into this tendon. One of the things I find interesting about it is if you look at a bodybuilder, somebody who's super buff, their triceps get, there's this big flat part, and that's because just the way that tendons come in, right? It comes into the tendon. I think it might be to make it stronger because it has kind of, even though the fibers come in from these different directions, it's acting on a hinge joint. So it just needs to be strong in one direction. So you have this big, strong tendon for it to act into. Is that a question or a stretching? All right.
Is there also a tendon that is here? I don't know. It feels like there's something.
Part of the pec feels like a tendon. And then we'll learn coracobrachialis is such a skinny muscle, it feels like a tendon. So there's a skinny little muscle right there that's coraco. But the one that's here is just, there's part of pec that feels like a tendon. And then coming off of your coracoid process, that can feel tendinous too. I'm seeing what you're doing. I think you're on your pec. I think people who use their pecs, that tends to feel very muscular. And massage therapists, like, I don't know what your workout routine is, but even just massage therapists, like this movement also works out our pecs. So we're doing that. Yeah. Yes.
Would the triceps tendon be so thick because the elbow is a stable joint and not a mobile joint?
I think that's one way to look at it.
Like
Yeah.
the knee, you know how tendons are really thick in the knee area. It's a stable joint. Not a mobile.
You said one angle, right? So we can have like a big, strong, thick one instead of like crossing from multiple directions, like our Achilles too, right?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
And it's like the only one doing that job.
Yeah.
I think it needs it strong, I think, for that reason too. Yeah, I love how you guys are really thinking about things. It's beautiful. All right, so our horizontal adduction across to the midline, horizontal abduction away from the midline on the horizon. You can see again how the deltoid anterior fibers and upper fibers of pec, right? They're on a very similar angle, right? So they're going to be synergists, right? They're doing the same jobs. We saw that they both do flexion. And we see now that they both do horizontal adduction, right? It's abduction. Sorry, adduction. It's logical, right? Because the fibers are pulling from the same direction. And then our abductor deltoid posterior fibers from the back. And you can see it's got that job all by itself. So that could be a big job for it. It's not getting help, no synergists. A ton of muscles do adduction. So yes. Yes. Yeah. The posterior deltoid, so the one in the back.
But okay, but also pectoralis.
So adduction is the one where it's coming in this way.
Yeah.
And so that one's anterior deltoid and pec. The is only deltoid. Yep. Makes sense? If your hand can fit all the way from the front to the back, you can feel, or you can switch, right? If you can only feel one side at a time, you can feel how this forward motion hardens the front And the backward motion hardens the back.
Yeah, how about the horizontal adduction? How about this one, the Serratus Major, no?
No, because
Shorten, no?
it's lengthening. So if it goes from here to here, when we go like that, it gets longer. You can feel it because it's being stretched.
Adduction in this way, but adduction this way, okay.
Yeah, AB, AD. Yep. That's okay. It's good. It's good that you're talking through the ones that are not, you're not sure. Y'all are doing great. All right, so adduction, right? That's when the arm comes down to the side. There's a lot of muscles that do that because anything that attaches from the axilla out to the arm in that direction, when it shortens, it's going to bring the arm down. So we got a lot of muscles that can help with that. Yep.
And this, maybe you can give some hint how to easily like understand. Adduction is actually moving towards midline,
Yep.
but abduction is away.
Yep.
This means, yeah,
Yep.
it means midline, so moving like this,
AD, add, like to add to the midline.
yeah,
AD,
because-
like add. And AB, like abduct, like to take away.
How about flexion now? How about flexion in this situation? Is it flexion? The
Flexion is this way,
Oh.
forward, you flex forward. You flex forward.
And all from this position, though, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, yes, that, yeah, it's like-
That's okay. You can ask anytime. Yeah. Did that help or you have more?
Can we all just do it? Like stand up and just.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Let's do a little practice review. Yeah. And if you want to do one side at a time and feel your muscles, go for it, or you can do both of them. So we're going to focus on our glenohumeral joint right now. A, B, adduction, adduction. Go ahead and say it when you do it. Let's A, B, abduction, abduction, adduction. All right, let's do horizontal, like horizon, horizontal adduction, horizontal AB.
Horizontal abduction.
Yeah, and then flexion
Flexion,
and extension.
extension.
Beautiful. And medial rotation and lateral rotation. And the scapulothoracic, we're going to do elevation and depression and upward rotation and downward rotation. Abduction, protraction, and adduction, retraction. Yep. Scapula, that's all of them. Thank you.
What medial?
stuff.
Medial. Medial adduction.
Medial rotation.
How about, no, moving, remember horizontal?
Yeah.
We have medial, when it's moving like this one.
This is here. The medial rotation is happening here.
That, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
May.
Yeah. All right. Let's do minor and then take lunch. Does that sound all right, or you need lunch now?
We can do minor.
Minor? All right, let's get through minor.
Thank you.
You bet. So minor is deep to major. Minor is deep to major, and and it looks like a little muscle, but some of these little muscles are very strong and important. And minor is one of those. It's quite strong. It's being a little slow. Sorry, folks. I'm gonna pause the recording because. All right, right, so pec minor is deep to pec major. It is palpable, but because pec major is such a thick muscle, it is generally best to isolate pec minor by coming around the side of pec major. So you want to go, pec major is big, right? You can feel the big belly of it. You want to go all the way around it to the ribs and then slowly go into the ribs because it's tender. So the biggest mistake I think on palpating pec minor is you don't want to like go into pec major. You want to go all the way around it to the ribs and then go in slowly because it's going to be tender. So it's the wall of muscle right there, and it's significant. It's a significant muscle even though it's small. So let's take a look at the details of this muscle. And this is going to be tight on a lot of folks. It is one of our scapula protractors, and a lot of us are in that position too much with our shoulders rounded. So our little pec minor is doing a big job. So let's start with the origin. So of course, our origin is our less movable side. And so the rib side is less movable than the scapula side. So we're talking about our third, fourth, and fifth ribs. And the insertion is on the movable side. And this is quite detailed to say the medial surface of the coracoid process. You'll often just see coracoid process of a scapula. So that's this front projection, which I just think is the coolest design, that the scapula has this bone that sticks out in the front so that you can pull the scapula forward. So almost everything else, you know, you can pull the arm or the scapula right backwards or to the side. But here, if we can now attach things to the front of the body, it's a pretty cool design. So it's very cool, right? So it wraps around the rib cage. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, it's wild. And so now, you know, we're looking at the fiber direction. If we go from this coracoid process down to those rib slips, we're talking about angling down like this. I'm not throwing gang signs, despite what I said earlier. I was not shot, and I'm not in the coracoid gang.
It's very major, it's very minor.
Nobody's got my back in here. I'm not gonna say. Do you have something?
I was just gonna say that the third, fourth, and fifth ribs are like pretty low. I was thinking they were like right up here, you know.
Oh yeah,
But they're,
yeah,
like pretty darn low.
yeah, yeah. It is interesting, kind of how low they
So
are.
it stretches pretty far,
Yep,
you know.
yep.
Because the guy in the video said you feel this notch here, then you go over, and then you go down 1, 2, 3, and I was like, all the way here?
Yeah,
That's pretty far. Dude.
yeah. So like the nipple line, if the nipples aren't like lower, tends to be like at the fourth rib. Yeah. Yeah. So in a way, you can palpate pec minor like through, right? Like I'm on pec minor right now, but the pecs are so thick that just if you want to be like specific, you can go around them, which is what we usually do to be precise with them. All right, let's talk about their action. So if we look at the fact that we can pull this coracoid process and therefore the scapula from here angling down, we can depress the scapula or make it go down, right? Because we're pulling from here down to here, so we can pull it down. Does that make sense? We can abduct it, right? We can pull it forward. That's protraction, is abduction. And we can downwardly rotate it. So I think downward rotation makes a lot more sense to understand it because it's hard to do from a neutral position, but it makes more sense from an upward rotation. So if you start upwardly rotated, downward rotation is taking it back down. Yeah. So if this was all the way up, then I think it makes more sense that this can pull it back down, right?
What is the difference between that and
Adduct.
yeah, because you're both, you're AD. It's just that the,
We are so close now.
Okay, I'm gonna have a seat in the hallway.
Okay.
this is
Yeah, so they work together, right?
Yeah.
So if you're focusing on what the glenohumeral joint is, this is adduct.
Yeah.
And if you're focusing on what the scapula does, this is downwardly rotate. And in reality, they usually do their job together. So you're often seeing it together. But you can keep the scapula still and go to there, right? And this now is just abduction and adduction. But when we start really moving it all, they're going together.
So
Is that helpful?
Yeah, I was just trying to distinguish the downward rotation and AD, like what is the difference? But it's kind of also synergistic.
They do often work together, but yeah, the downward rotation part is what is the scapula doing? And the adduction is what is the glenohumeral joint doing? Yeah. Yep.
And I think that her arm went all the way back. Downward rotation of the scapula.
Yep. Yep. So like if you're trying to stretch it even further, right? Like that's a good stretch, but I try to show it the other way because I think it might be visually more obvious, but that's downward rotation as well.
this causes the wing scapula.
Pulling
if
it
it's tight, you know,
if it's tight
among other, but this is the kind of,
with the weak serratus.
yeah.
Yep. All right. So let me just quickly go through the other pictures and then we'll have lunch. Because now we're making people wait.
Just a little bit.
So I think he's going to be our last visitor unless Gail comes back for this. All right, so hey, I do want to call this out, folks. This is going to come up on your licensing exam, almost for sure. And I can't say that about everything we study because there's so many questions. But there's definitely going to be questions about how the brachial plexus can get impinged. And we'll study it again, and we'll study thoracic outlet syndrome. But this brachial plexus, this nerve plexus, passes directly under pec minor and also under the clavicle. And so this muscle can press on it or impinge it sometimes. And we'll talk about this in anatomy and physiology as well, but these nerve bundles tend to travel also with blood vessels because the body is really conserving its creation energy, right? Because it's got to protect these nerve bundles and blood vessels. So it puts the big ones together and wraps them all in protection. So here we've got blood vessel and nerves all traveling together, and that can get impinged sometimes, but we'll come back to that. So yeah, we often go around pec major to palpate this edge of pec minor. And again, you can work through the layers, but not as precisely. And again, with breast tissue, side lying is a great strategy. Questions? Yeah, great question. So we'll study thoracic outlet syndrome in more detail later. But a lot of times if the nerve is compressed by muscle, we can often help with it. And oftentimes there's trigger points related to the pattern and fascial constrictions. So we can help with those causes. But there can be other causes too, like bones pressing on it. And then we can't help as much. But the scalenes will also often be a problem with that. And so we want to work with the scalenes as well. That's more advanced, and we'll get to that later. You'll get good enough to work with the scalenes. You bet. So here again, you can spend time with the antagonists, you know, and synergists to look at our patterns. Now we know all of the depressors, right? Our traps, our serratus, and our pec minor. So they all work together. And our elevators, right? So our elevators tend to be short and tight. So we often need to lengthen our upper traps, our rhomboids, and our levator. That's like 90% of your clients have that going on. I'm always shocked when I see someone who doesn't. I mean, I can literally remember them all. I had this like 50-some-year-old man who played basketball and worked at Microsoft, and his shoulders were as soft as a 10-year-old. And I'm like, what is going on? You work with computers for a living, and he played hardcore basketball with his buddies and somehow worked out all his tension. But I still remember him to this day because I'm like, nobody's shoulders feel like that. I want whatever you're having. You got some magic going on there, buddy. Yeah, he played basketball. He worked out all his tension. Yeah, it was an exciting thing. We should have, I kept his number and used him as a case study. All right, so our protractors, right, our serratus and our pec minor do that, right, and we're often over protracting. So these two are often getting a real big workout. These are ones we want to address often. And then our traps and rhomboids are often weak. And I'm going to wrap it up there and pause. And do you guys want? All right, so subclavius is a really, really skinny little muscle. You cannot even always palpate it, but it's still worthwhile massaging the area it's located. Sub is like a submarine, it means below, and clavius for the clavicle. So this is right below, skinny little muscle. I think I have a page with better details. It's such a minor muscle that we might not, but let us see. Let us see. And I don't know, because it just won't let me go. Oh, there we go. We're definitely having a post-lunch effect going on in here.
What is it?
Subclavius. All right. Okay, so here, so the clavicle, a little review reminder here, is a S-shaped bone. Some of you might picture it more like a straight line, and you can look at your models and see how curved it is. And that's all super palpable. You know, you can kind of use a finger and a thumb, kind of walk your way from your sternum out on your clavicle, and you can feel how curved it is. I broke mine a long time ago, so mine has a nice bump where it was broken. Bone break in the body.
Why? My cousin go first twice.
Wow, twice. 2 questions. Why is it the most common, and how did I break it? I think it's the most common because, right, this connection here between the sternum and the clavicle is the only true joint supporting your whole limb, right? So like if you land on your arm or hand or shoulder, it's a thin bone, right? A lot of weight can snap. Mine was a fun story. I was here in a cold January, snowy, frozen ground. My friend had a lot of horses and knew what she was doing, and I did not. And I mean, I rode, but like she was a real trainer, and there was an unbroken colt, and she would catch the colt, jump on, you know, she knew what she was doing. I was like, that looks like fun. That looks like a really good idea for me to do that. So I did it too. And the colt threw me, right? And I landed between my head and my shoulder and just snapped like a twig. Hardest part of the story to believe is that, you know, the shock, right? It's a lot of pain. First thing I said, and this is the hard part of the story to believe, is my mascara running?
Wow.
It's so out of context, you can't understand it.
Wow.
I said, is my mascara running?
Oh.
What's a
That's so
colt?
funny.
What's a colt?
Right?
Like an unbroken young horse.
Oh.
Yeah.
So a colt is an unbroken.
Like an unbroken young horse.
Unbroken?
Like they call it that untrained
Yo, these
young
words
horse.
are funny, guys.
Kind of wild, right?
Kinda wild.
Oh, Zephyr was in a cult. That's awesome.
No, I was shot and I was in a cult. I was working with a colt yesterday. God, weakest. Did you have a question?
How long did you hold on for?
That's another good question. I have no idea.
Long enough to get thrown off.
I don't remember.
You weren't distracted doing the mascara or anything.
Oh my God.
Long story short, clavicle was a thin one.
Yeah, the clavicle breaks. You know, that's the takeaway.
But was your mascara okay? You didn't tell us.
I think I probably looked a mess. Yeah, truth be told. Yeah, that's why I stopped wearing it. I was traumatized.
There are a lot of good stories with horses, people that are around horses. There's wild things that happen. I have horse stories too. from
Yeah.
when I was younger.
Yeah,
Bucking and throwing kids left and right.
yeah,
They got spooked.
yeah. I was on horses yesterday, me and my kid. It was fun.
But you still won't wear mascara?
Yeah.
What's that?
That's the part of the story I can't believe. You won't get back on a horse, I mean, you'll get back on a horse, but you won't wear mascara.
Oh, I was kidding about the mascara. I don't. I date someone who has a ranch, and she has a lot of horses.
That's where we should have our graduation.
Yes, we know how. You don't have to pay for it. You just get with them. Right?
Yeah.
The most.
You don't have to go beyond.
People rent,
A what?
well, because, you know. people usually go-
Horses and cows.
Okay, okay.
I really should pause this. Jesus Christ, we're recording all this. So subclavius is a really, really skinny, very, very little muscle that you cannot always palpate, but it's right under the clavicle. And kind of if you protract or bring the clavicle forward, like roll your shoulder forward, you can kind of, get under it better. And there's kind of like a little bit of sort of thickening of the muscle that sometimes you can feel on the medial side. You can in that area, it can be useful. This attaches to the first rib, and the muscles that attach to the first ribs can get really jacked up. So the scalenes and the subclavius. So it's good to massage this fascia, even if you're not always sure you're right on it. So you trace the whole clavicle, yeah? So this origin is the first rib and the first rib and a cartilage. Over here. And so this top part of the sternum, this little kind of boxy part, the manubrium, there's a rib way up high that attaches to it. And so you're just basically right under the clavicle. And its insertion is inferior surface of the medial third of the clavicle. Maybe just the medial aspect. And even though it's a little muscle, it has some jobs. It can do some things. It can depress the clavicle, bring it down, and bring it forward. So that's part of why if you bring your clavicle forward, sometimes you can feel that little muscle. It can elevate the first rib during inhalation. And that's why these muscles that attach on the first rib can get really. So I talked earlier about how we're supposed to use our diaphragms to breathe a lot. And a lot of us do what's called upper chest breathing. And it's sort of like a reaction when we get stressed out or tense. We oftentimes breathe up here in our first rib. And so our scalenes and our subclavius get overworked with that. And it can also stabilize the sternoclavicular joint. And again, that sternoclavicular joint is the only true joint that attaches really the whole upper scapula. So pretty straightforward, very small muscle. Any questions about it? What's that? All right, so then here we have, we can see someone doing a side lying palpation. You can do this face up or side lying, and pretty straightforward on that one. So I'm not going to belabor the point. We'll move on to the next one. All right, so biceps brachii, this is the superficial muscle in the upper arm, and it's usually the one people think of. It's the one, that makes the visible raised, muscle on the upper arm. There's one deep to it though, also brachialis. So it's not the only one there, but it's the one people think of because it's the one that moves around. It's got two heads, a long head and a short head. The long head is this one here that ends up going through this intertubercular groove up and over to go all the way over to the supraglenoid tubercle. So when we first studied the scapula, you might recall there was a supraglenoid tubercle and an infraglenoid tubercle, and that eventually we were going to talk about what attaches to it. And that's now a long head of biceps goes to the supraglenoid tubercle. And then the short head arises on the coracoid process of the scapula. And we just studied a muscle that attaches there. Which one? The coracoid process. Pectoralis minor. Excellent. Yeah, pectoralis minor. So they're sharing that coracoid process.
That's why they said medial. Does the lateral end of the coracoid process?
Yep, exactly. That's why they said that. Yep. And this is kind of a classic shaped muscle, right? Before you started studying how many different shapes muscles come in, you might have kind of thought about this type of muscle first, where you have like this really obvious belly, right? And then these long tendons on the end. But now you know better, and you know that muscles come in all different kinds of shapes. But here we have a classic, right? Biceps brachii, keeping it classic. All right, so let's take a look at the details here, starting with the ode ide A. And we'll do that at canvas speed, because why not? All right, so starting with the origin, like I said, there's a short head and a long head. The short head originates at the coracoid process, right? The crow's beak is the origin of the name coracoid. So hook on the anterior aspect of the scapula. I love that design. I give that design a 2 thumbs up. And then the long head goes up to the supraglenoid tubercle, which you can't see too well in this drawing, but this tendon goes all the way into the intertubercular groove up and over. So as a little refresher, That's this groove between the greater tubercle and the lesser tubercle. And so it's going to go up and over the top here above the glenoid fossa, all the way up in there. So you can feel very tender, this intertubercular groove that is palpable. But then when it heads up in here, that's right, super deep in the socket. We can't get all the way up in there. But this part is tender and palpable, and I don't recommend palpating it, right? But we can massage the rest of the muscle. The insertion is the veracity of the radius. And so the radius is your thumb side, like rad. So it's on that side. And the aponeurosis of the biceps brachii. So here we have the radial side going off like so. And then the aponeurosis of the biceps brachii is this right here. And what an aponeurosis is a wider tendon. And so we talked about the thoracolumbar aponeurosis with the latissimus dorsi. It's huge. On the back, it's a big triangle on the back of gray fascia. Here's a much smaller slip of an aponeurosis.
What does neurosis mean?
That's a great question that I do not know the answer for. Maybe someone could look it up.
I was just curious.
I'm curious now too. And then I already drew the, the shape of this muscle. It's super palpable and super official. If you do it, move. Let's talk about its actions and come back to that. So of course, it's a strong flexor of the elbow. It also supinates the forearm. So people sometimes call it the beer drinking muscle because you flex and supinate. So like this, you could be drinking anything. I don't know why they say beer. Beverage of choice. But it's, if you want to work it out in the gym, just keep in mind that it supinates as well. You get in that twist of the supination as well for the full bicep brachii workout. Anna, you looked up the word. What does it mean?
Well, they're only applying it to mental disorders. That's how I heard it. So I was like, what does it have to do?
Yeah, we'll have to get into the etymology of it, right?
Yeah.
All right, and then the long head. Actually, I lied. Both heads can flex the glenohumeral joint as well. So it crosses the shoulder joint as well. So both heads cross the glenohumeral joint and the elbow joint. So we can act on both ends. Yep. So it's a flexor of the shoulder and of the elbow. Yeah, big, strong, thick muscle, very palpable. The one palpation caution, right, is that on the medial aspect of the upper arm. So when you're palpating this very palpable muscle, be careful as you go to the medial aspect and not to get right on that nerve. But it's pretty obvious and easy to not do that. So pretty straightforward muscle. And of course, this whole part, right, is covered by the deltoid, but lots of it is palpable. And this is right where I said you can feel this tendon, but it's very tender and I don't recommend really focusing on it. And here's a diagram where you can see the short head going into the coracoid process. Here, they're talking about how you can have the person contract, right? You can have the person actively flex and you can feel that muscle, right? You can have them also supinate at the same time. So It's a pretty strong muscle. It has brachialis deep to it. So, you know, later on we'll work on also palpating brachialis deep to it. Sometimes the deltoid can kind of get glued into it. So it can be good to work all the way to the bottom of the deltoid where it meets the biceps brachii to really, and that can be tender too. So you might want to ease in on your client.
Sure. And then you say, listen, can't go any harder. Then what happens?
Feel like we're gonna have a whole role playing here. And then what happens?
It's like,
It depends on the person, right? And I mean, sometimes, of course, you can go deeper, but if you feel like you're going to damage their tissue, you can talk about how it feels like that's all that's safe right now and work it out. And if they want someone who's wanting to go deeper than you, they can find them.
the other day, I was massaging Sarah,
Uh-huh.
and I thought that I was pushing on the levator scapulae,
Uh-huh.
but it was actually the superior angle of her scapula,
Uh-huh.
and I was shocked.
Uh,
I said, wow, that thing is, that's pretty darn high up there, Sarah. And she said, yeah, I don't know. And I said, well, that's your bone. And then she said, it feels like a muscle to her. I pushed on.
uh-huh. Yeah, the superior angle is pretty high up there, and we'll focus on how to get very specific with it. And also the levator does insert there, right? So it can be both, right? That you're actually on this angle and the
Well, it's
levator.
hard for me to differentiate if it was a bone or a muscle bone.
Uh-huh, yeah.
So I had to ask for help,
Uh-huh,
and I did.
cool. Nice. I love that kind of work. I would like to show you guys how to have your client face up and really isolate that, because it's very effective, and then trace, you know, all the way up levator. So it's good stuff. Okay, so triceps, just like biceps are often called biceps, triceps are often called triceps, but their full name are Triceps Brachii. And the prefix tri means what? 3. So this is a 3-headed muscle. And it's the only arm, so it pretty much takes up the whole thing. And it crosses, all of the heads cross the elbow. And so it's a powerful extender of the elbow. One of the heads, the long head, also crosses the shoulder. So it can also extend the shoulder, but only one of them. But all of them act on the elbow.
How do you say that holocrine process? How do you? say that?
Lecranon.
Oh, lecranon.
Yep. That's how I say it.
That's pretty powerful, lecranon.
I'm from, what an exciting word. I'm from the Midwest. I mean, how do you say it, right? Lecranon. Okay, let's look at the tricep. Let's start with origins. Okay, so long head goes all the way to the infraglenoid tubercle. So it's not that easy to palpate the infraglenoid tubercle, but remember the glenoid fossa is where the ball of the humerus inserts, and it's just below that. It's this bit of a bump here, but it's just a roughened spot, and it's not easy to palpate. And when this is way up in the axilla, and you already know how far up the teres is, so it's even higher up than that. The lateral head originates on the posterior surface, so the back of the proximal half of the humerus. So proximal, again, is closer to the point of origin. So the side closer to the head of the humerus on the back. Way closer to the fingertips. Proximal is closer to the axilla. So our lateral head over here. And then last but not least, our medial head, posterior surface of the distal half of the humerus. And we must have a better picture that shows exactly where that is. Let's see on Trail Guide. Yes, and on a bigger surface. On my trail, it's on page 97, but let me see if it must be, I'm guessing, on here as well. You scoot down, there it is. So on this drawing, this whole bottom left part, see this medial one is this deep and attaches to this big part of the bone. And then the lateral head attaches up here and the long head attaches up here. And the insertion is the elbow bone, you know, the bony part of the elbow.
The funny bone.
The funny bone is actually medial to that.
Oh.
So if you feel around the corner, if you were to apply a lot of pressure in there, there's a nerve, but not right on this part is pretty hard. The part that'll hurt you is the nervy part. And then we kind of talked about it a little bit before, but I'm kind of circling around this whole oval part that was in gray that's now in purple. See, we have these heads, the bellies converge into this big broad tendon. And it works on this muscle. So I think focusing on the bellies a good strategy for this muscle. So the actions on this one I think are pretty straightforward. All heads extend the elbow. It's a powerful elbow extender. The formal name for the elbow joint is humero-ulnar joint. Just taking the part of the words humerus for upper arm and ulna and putting them together. The names are, the two bone names or two parts of the bony landmarks. And then the one action that can be distinguished is that the long head, since it also crosses the shoulder joint, can also extend the shoulder, the glenohumeral joint, and adduct the shoulder. That's a minor action, that last one. So questions on the triceps? Pretty straightforward, I think. And let's see if we have any useful pictures here we haven't looked at yet. Here on this upper right picture, you can see how the long head actually goes between teres minor and teres major. So if you want to be really precise in palpating that part, I think you can all find teres major and teres minor by now. You could go between that. And of course, deltoid is covering part of the triceps. So it's easiest if you feel below, deltoid's up here, and then you can feel below it. Pretty obvious muscle. And again, our main action here is extension of the elbow, and then a little bit of extension for the long head on the shoulder. And I think, what do we have? One more today, I think? Or is coraco? The coraco in Corticobrachialis refers to the coracoid process. Again, that anterior projection off the scapula And we now know all three muscles that attach there. What are they? Pec minor?
Biceps.
Excellent. Short head of biceps brachii and now coracobrachialis. So there's three muscles that attach there. The coracobrachialis is strong at flexing the shoulder and less so adduction of the shoulder. So that's a good one to keep in mind. Let's take a look at its origins, insertions. Okay.
The process at the end of the corticoid process just like the short head of the bicep brachii. Is that true?
Yes,
They gotta be right next to each other.
I think that's true. Yes. Okay. So here's our last one.
Upper arm, like interior part.
Yes,
Medium, I just mentioned.
just below your armpit. If you feel just below your armpit, it's a skinny muscle right here. So it's like just behind biceps brachii. Yeah, you feel it? And if you flex your shoulder, you can feel a strong.
I'm supposed to feel biceps in near the second one.
Yeah,
Like separated.
yep, yep. So if you feel biceps, it'll be like medial to it by the armpit.
I don't have it.
It's very tender. Be careful, Krish. It's very tender. It feels nervy, yeah. You could walk your way from the coracoid or just a skinny little muscle medial to biceps brachii. All right, so here's the coracoid process side, and then it inserts medial surface of the mid shaft of the humerus. Let me scooch down for the diagram that shows that better. This is going to be deep and near a endangerment zone. So this part right here, you're not going to palpate the insertion. Is the part where we can really feel it, right up in here. It's a skinny muscle. It's usually painful, but it can be useful to massage it. Again, it's typically neglected, and its actions are flexing the glenohumeral joint is its primary action, and it can do a little bit of adduction as well, but mostly flexion. And it's going to be tucked right next to the deltoid as well. So just medial. Push forward, you can feel skinny, tight muscle there.
So the insertion area is under biceps brachii.
Yes, tucked in there, but here we have that nervy blood vessel area, so we don't really want to press in there. Yeah. All right, let's see if there's any other useful drawings here. Otherwise, I think we might be done with this baby. So we got a flexion, and so it's a good time to look at all of our flexors again. It works with deltoid, anterior deltoid. It works with and it works with biceps brachii and coracobrachialis. So of course, all of our flexors, right, are all coming from that same direction. That's its primary, so that's what we're going to focus on. I don't know why that doesn't seem to be working.